The stack had grown thicker since the city's last budgetary session. This past summer, the city council, citing unavoidable financial strain, executed the failed bid. They cut non-essential health benefits and reduced subsidized support for long-term specialized care. For Marcus, this wasn't policy. It was an active attack on Clara's ability to breathe. The deficit forced him to assume an even more brutal workload, picking up every available overtime shift, driving his already fanatical commitment to the edge of physical collapse. Marcus pulled on his final layer, the orange utility vest. It was thick, stiff, and utilitarian, stitched with reflective stripes that caught the meager pre-dawn light. It wasn't just a uniform. It was the symbol of his sacrifice, the tangible evidence of his relentless dedication. Clad in the orange glow, he left the apartment, the door clicking softly behind him, sealing his world of paternal necessity away from the outside world of judgment. The drive to the sanitation hub was short and cold. The hub, the municipal distribution center, was a sprawling labyrinth of stinking trucks. Mountainous piles of discarded tires and metallic recycling boxes, always humming under the cold, harsh glare of fluorescent lights. It was the epicenter of Marcus's routine, a place defined by decay and relentless necessary utility. He parked his battered sedan and headed toward the dispatch office. The air inside the complex smelled of diesel fumes, stale waste residue, and cheap institutional cleaning product, a scent that had become the scent of his purpose. Inside the break room, only one other person was already present, nursing a lukewarm coffee. "Morning, Thorne," rasped Jerome Jerry Vance, 55. Jerry was robust, though his thinning gray hair barely covered his scalp, perpetually hidden beneath a faded baseball cap. He was a man exhausted by decades of cynicism, yet underneath the weary exterior lay a surprisingly soft heart. Jerry admired Marcus's work ethic, in awe of its perfection, but he genuinely feared the level of sacrifice his coworker maintained. "Vance," Marcus replied, his voice a low, gravelly sound, stripped of inflection. He grabbed his manifest clipboard. 4 o'clock on the dot. "You clock in earlier than the janitor, man. You got a secret competition with the sun?" Jerry managed a weak smile, but his eyes held concern. Marcus ignored the question, scanning the route sheet. Today's assignment: the Willow Creek District, a low-income residential and commercial neighborhood known for its density and the sheer volume of refuse it generated. It was the quintessential landscape of grime and decay, streets already littered with discarded fast food wrappers, broken bottles and forgotten household objects, an inventory of failed hopes and momentary indulgences. "You look beat, Marcus," Jerry pressed gently, dropping the banter. "That double shift yesterday hit you hard. You sure you can handle Willow Creek solo today?" "It's heavy." "I'm fine," Marcus stated, the words clipped and final. He didn't offer explanations. He couldn't. How could he explain to Jerry that the exhaustion was a necessary component of the mission, that the pain in his back was simply the price of stability? Jerry sighed, knowing the battle was lost. "Look, I know about the kid, Marcus. Everyone does. I know the failed bid hit you hard. But you gotta pace yourself, man. You burn out, then what?" Marcus looked up from the manifest, his tired eyes meeting Jerry's. "I won't burn out. Burnout is a luxury." He turned away and walked out to the truck bay. The massive refuse collector, Unit 734, stood waiting, its steel flanks cold to the touch. It was a brutal machine designed to crush and contain, and Marcus felt a profound kinship with its singular, destructive efficiency. He performed the mandatory pre-trip inspection with meticulous care, checking the hydraulics, the tires, the oil. Perfection in his routine was non-negotiable. The Willow Creek District was waiting. The district was a mosaic of chipped paint and desperate commerce. Marcus began his route, the rhythmic crunch swoosh of the hydraulic compactor becoming the soundtrack to his internal monologue. He drove slowly, his gaze sweeping the curbside. Every stop required physical precision and unwavering strength. He would hop out, seize the large commercial bins, overflowing, the lids straining, and wrestle them onto the automated lift. The steel jaws of the truck would bite down, then release, and the contents would vanish, consumed by the massive machine. It was in this landscape of grime and decay that Marcus found a strange, paradoxical clarity. The refuse he hauled was the discarded evidence of other people's finished narratives. Failed projects, forgotten aspirations, broken dreams, he collected them all. A faded photograph of a smiling couple tossed carelessly. A stack of unopened self-help books. The shattered remnants of a beloved garden gnome. He was the custodian of waste, a witness to the profound impermanence of material hope. Yet this constant exposure to decay did not breed despair in him. Instead, it fueled a relentless engine of love. He wasn't collecting trash. He was earning the right to pay for the sterile, hopeful environment of St. Jude's pediatric wing. His purpose wasn't to escape this thankless labor, but to transform the burden into the absolute measure of his dedication. He thought of Clara's subtle humor, the way her pale hand would reach out for his rough one when he visited her at the hospital after his shifts. He had to be strong for her. He had to show her that persistence was dignity. He was moving faster than usual. The anxiety brought on by the failed bid and the ever-present shadow of the medical invoice stack demanded increased efficiency. He needed to finish this route early so he could secure the additional unscheduled collection route Jerry had mentioned might open up later that afternoon. He was working on pure autopilot, the repetition of lift, dump compacting erasing the individual steps from his immediate consciousness. He was Marcus the machine, designed for one task. As the morning rush began to coalesce, cars starting, the faint aroma of burnt coffee mixing with the street to Marcus felt the first tremor of true, debilitating exhaustion. His mind, usually sharp and focused on the logistics of the route, began to drag, thick and sluggish. He had just finished a particularly difficult section involving 10 massive dumpsters in a row, the stench of stale food waste clinging to his utility vest. He swung Unit 734 around the corner of Elder Street, a particularly narrow stretch known for its erratic parking and tricky alley access. He was already 30 minutes ahead of schedule, a fact that should have brought relief, but only brought deeper, more urgent pressure to maintain the pace. He pulled up to the curb where 3 overflowing blue recycling bins awaited. He engaged the lift, successfully cleared the first 2, and moved on to the third, a heavy metal drum tipped precariously on the curb. He secured the drum, hit the automated lift button, and watched the mechanism lift, turn, and dump the contents. Crunch. He lowered the lift, secured the truck's hydraulics, and put the truck into drive, accelerating toward the next block. He drove 300 feet, already mentally calculating the next series of turns, when a terrifying cold jolt of realization hit him. It stopped his breath in his throat, a sudden blinding panic that felt worse than any physical blow. The Miss Street pickup, Elder Street, that third bin, the heavy metal drum. He had secured the drum. He had lifted and dumped the drum. He had lowered the lift, but he hadn't replaced the drum on the curb. He had left it. Not its contents, but the expensive, heavy, proprietary recycling receptacle itself. Marcus slammed on the brakes of Unit 734, the massive truck groaning in protest. He checked his side mirror, his heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. 300 feet back, sitting abandoned in the middle of the narrow street, was the empty metal recycling drum. The mistake was catastrophic. Not just logistically, leaving debris in the street was a massive violation of safety protocol, leading to immediate citations and docking of pay, but symbolically, his perfection was the shield he held against chaos. His rigorous adherence to the routine was his sacred promise. To make a mistake was to show vulnerability, to introduce instability into the perfect mechanism of his sacrifice. This single critical lapse threatened his professional perfection, and metaphorically threatened to break the promise of stability he maintained for Clara. The anxiety flared into raw, visceral fear. If he received a citation or lost an hour's pay, that gap would have to be covered. The invoice stack was unforgiving. The driver in a small sedan leaned on his horn, his face contorted in rage. "Move it, pal. Are you blind?" Marcus ignored him, adrenaline surging, overriding the pain in his limbs. He had to get to that drum, secure it, and clear the street. He reached the spot, threw the transmission into park, and leapt from the cab without even fully engaging the parking brake. Another minor violation, but his mind was focused solely on correcting the major one. He reached the heavy metal drum just as the frustrated sedan driver pulled alongside, screaming obscenities about sanitation workers and their incompetence. "Can't you do anything right, you filthy?" Marcus lifted the drum with a fierce, almost violent surge of strength, tossing it onto the curb. He didn't look at the driver. He didn't respond. He moved with a speed that defied his 42 years and his exhaustion. His face, usually a mask of weary stoicism, was momentarily contorted with the effort and the sheer, brutal shame of the error. He scrambled back into the cab, pulled Unit 734 forward, clearing the obstruction. The gridlock slowly began to dissolve, the cacophony of horns fading into the general roar of the morning. Marcus pulled over momentarily, resting his forehead against the cold steering wheel. His breath was ragged. That was it. That was the moment he had feared. The pressure, the sheer, unrelenting weight had finally cracked his concentration. He was human, he was fallible, and in this unforgiving mission, fallibility carried a price. He sat there, the massive machine idling beneath him, contemplating the overwhelming cost of his mission. He had convinced himself that his dedication was infinite, that love could perpetually override physics and finance. But the physical reality, the aching joints, the bloodshot eyes, the sudden cognitive slip spoke a different, brutal truth. He had to choose. Collapse now and risk everything, or internalize the fear, reset the system, and push harder. He chose the latter. He straightened his curved shoulder, took a deep, shaky breath that smelled faintly of diesel and old garbage, and put the truck back into gear. The route continued, though. The mechanical efficiency was now laced with a deep, searing layer of self-doubt. Every bin was secured twice. Every move was double-checked. The incident had served as a stark, punishing reminder of the stakes. He spent the next 3 hours wrestling with the mental fallout, pushing through the final, brutal stages of the Willow Creek District route. The sun was fully up now, a pale, anemic light struggling to penetrate the low-hanging industrial haze. Jerry was there finishing his own morning run. He eyed Marcus critically. "You look like you saw a ghost, Thorne." "Elder Street," Marcus admitted, the single word carrying the weight of the morning's failure. Jerry's expression softened. "Ah, the rogue drum. Yeah, dispatch heard about that. They were going to write it up, but the foreman smoothed it over. Said you corrected it immediately." Relief, sharp and overwhelming, flooded Marcus. "He did? Yeah. Said you're the most reliable man they've got. But listen, they offered that overtime run, the commercial overflow on the industrial side. You got to take it easy, man. That run is brutal." Marcus took the clipboard without hesitation. "I need it. Marcus, I need the money, Jerry." Marcus gripped the manifest, his knuckles white. "Clara needs the stability." Jerry didn't argue further. He knew the look in Marcus's eyes, the quiet, stubborn resilience that bordered on the fanatical. He worked through the late afternoon, the pale November sunlight fading rapidly, swallowed by the early winter dusk. He was operating on fumes, the 3 cups of asphalt coffee long metabolized, leaving only the dull ache in his bones. He knew he shouldn't be doing this. Every rational voice, Jerry's warnings, the memory of the missed pickup, the physical protest of his 42-year-old body told him to stop. But the image of Clara's pale face and the unyielding height of the medical invoice stack drove him onward. He drove Unit 734 back to the sanitation hub, the cold setting in aggressively now. He parked the truck in the bay, completed the necessary closing paperwork, and punched the clock. He walked slowly back to his sedan, the orange utility vest feeling heavy, steeped in the grime and sweat of a punishing day. He was utterly, completely depleted. He wasn't just tired. He felt excavated, hollowed out by the sheer output of unwavering effort. He sat in his car, the engine idling, the heater struggling against the external chill. He closed his eyes, allowing himself 1 minute of pure, unadulterated rest before starting the final leg of his journey, the drive home and the brief, precious moments with Clara before she slept. It was during this minute of stillness that the events of the day began to coalesce, the internal narrative shifting from mission completion to philosophical reflection, the dawn realization. He thought back to the shame and terror of the Miss Street pickup. The fear was real, the mistake profound. But what followed was not despair or resignation. What followed was the decision to continue. He opened his eyes and looked out the windshield. The sky was ink black now, but in the distance. Over the low hills beyond the industrial park, the first faint, pale glow of city light was beginning to rise. Not the sun, but the ambient glow of the city coming alive for the night shift, the eternal, relentless pulse of human activity. He realized then what he was seeking. The true hope was not a sudden cure for Clara, nor a miraculous financial windfall that would eliminate the medical invoice stack. Those things were external, beyond his control, luxurious outcomes he dared not depend upon. The true hope, he realized, was in the refusal to stop. He had started the day driven by the necessity of the debt, the burden of the invoices, and the fear of failure. But in that final, exhausted moment, he understood that his dedication itself was the greatest contribution he could make, the most powerful lesson he could impart to his fragile daughter. The profound realization hit him with the force of an emotional epiphany. His strength was not measured by the perfection of his route, or by the size of the paycheck, or by what he might one day achieve if he transcended this life of grime. His true strength was measured only by what he refused to give up. He refused to surrender to the systemic burdens that sought to crush him. He refused to give up his dignity in the face of thankless labor. Most importantly, he refused to give up the promise of stability he had made to Clara. He felt a deep, quiet settling within his chest. The exhaustion was still there, a physical anchor, but the existential weight had lifted, replaced by a fierce, undeniable sense of purpose. He was not a victim of his circumstances. He was the master of his effort. He started the final drive home, the cold steering wheel familiar under his calloused hands. As he drove, he watched the city lights flicker to life, millions of people living out their narratives, discarding their refuse, dreaming their dreams. He was the invisible force that cleared the detritus, the silent engine that allowed their lives to proceed. He arrived back at the small apartment. The hall light was still on, a soft, welcoming beacon. He slipped off the orange utility vest and hung it carefully by the door. Clara was awake, sitting up in bed, working silently on a complex coloring book. The knit beanie still pulled over her ears. She looked frail against the pillows, but her eyes, deep brown and clear, held a startling intelligence. "Hi, Papa," she whispered, her voice thin. Marcus sat on the edge of her bed, carefully avoiding jostling her. He didn't ask about her health. He knew she would minimize any discomfort. "Hi, sweet pea," he replied, his voice softer than it had been all day. She pointed to the picture she was coloring, a phoenix rising from ashes. "It's resilience," she stated simply, a word he had never explicitly taught her, but one she had clearly internalized through observation. He nodded, running his rough thumb gently over her smooth, pale forehead, careful not to press too hard. "You worked so hard today, Papa," she said. It wasn't a question or a complaint, just a simple statement of fact, acknowledging the raw, undeniable effort stamped into his face and his posture. "I did," Marcus affirmed. He didn't offer a platitude about earning a living. He offered the simple truth of the struggle. "It was difficult, but I got everything done, every single stop." He thought of the rogue drum, the moment of panic, and the subsequent decision to push through. He hadn't told her about the city's budgetary cuts or the towering bills or the physical agony of the double shift. He had only ever shown her the result. The father who left early, who returned late, but who always returned. Clara smiled, a small, genuine curve of her mouth that was more valuable than any medical miracle. "You never quit, Papa." "Never," Marcus promised, the word a renewed vow, solidified by the crushing labor of the day. He tucked her back in, adjusting her hat in the thick duvet. He stayed until her breathing deepened, signaling her descent into sleep. But now it looked different. It was no longer a symbol of insurmountable failure. It was the physical monument to the ongoing battle, the terrain over which he waged his war of dedication. Marcus went to the sink, splashing cold water on his face, washing away the residue of the Willow Creek district and the industrial sector. He looked at his reflection, the tired, bloodshot eyes, the permanent curve in his shoulder. He was a sanitation worker, a man defined by the disposal of society's waste. Yet in the grime he had found his gold. He rose with the familiar crunch of worn cartilage in his knees, the sound a personal indicator of the accumulating hours. His hands, perpetually rough and calloused, sought the warmth of the worn wood doorframe as he navigated the dark hall. He passed Clara Willowthorn's room. Her 8-year-old body, thin and tragically pale due to her chronic illness, was currently in a period of fragile stability, but Marcus knew stability was ephemeral, always dependent on the next injection. The next procedure, the next stack of payments directed towards Saint's philosophical victory from the night before, the dawn realization. The fierce understanding that resilience was a choice and hope was forged in the refusal to concede, did not eliminate the pain or the debt. It simply provided the framework to bear them. The medical invoice stack still sat on the counter, a silent, mocking testament to the insurmountable distance between his income and Clara's necessity. Now, however, the stack felt less like a looming threat and more like a high bar he was determined to clear, one lift at a time. He dressed quickly, pulling on the layers required to meet the raw pre-dawn cold. The orange utility vest went on last, stiff and pungent with the ghosts of previous shifts, diesel, industrial dust, and the stale residue of urban decay. Clad in his uniform, he was no longer merely Marcus. He was the functional embodiment of necessity. The drive to the sanitation hub was always a study in isolation. He was one of the few vehicles moving, a solitary orange vessel cutting through the black arteries of the city. The hub itself, with its sprawling, metallic sprawl of processing equipment and the perpetual stench of managed waste, felt less like a workplace and more like the operational core of his singular existence. "You are going to wear out the clock mechanisms, Thorne," Jerry grumbled, offering a steaming mug of thin, institutional coffee. Marcus took the cup, the heat welcome against his rough hands. Willow Creek again, Marcus stated. Already reading the manifest for the low-income residential and commercial district, the quintessential landscape of grime and decay. Heavy day, Jerry acknowledged, his tired eyes examining Marcus. You pushed it yesterday. You sure you didn't pull anything during that rogue drum incident? Marcus shook his head. I'm fine. Jerry sighed, leaning against the counter. Look, I'm serious. The city's tightening up on liability after the failed bid. They cut benefits, they increase our routes, and they watch us like hawks for mistakes. If you get hurt, they won't cover long-term, you know that. And that little girl, Jerry stopped, struggling to find the appropriate caution. She needs you whole, Marcus. Don't let your stubbornness jeopardize the main objective. My stubbornness is the main objective, Marcus stated quietly, his voice low and gravelly. He didn't elaborate. He couldn't explain the profound, almost religious conviction that had solidified the night before that his physical presence, his unwavering stability, was the treatment as vital as any pill Clara received from St. Jude's. Jerry, understanding that Marcus was operating on a level of commitment he couldn't touch, simply nodded, defeated. All right, but be careful on Elm Street. Those new residential bins are overloaded and poorly secured. I almost lost a finger yesterday. Marcus headed out to Unit 734. The massive truck was cold, the steel surfaces radiating the damp chill. He performed his pre-trip inspection with the same fanatical rigor, ensuring every hydraulic arm, every tire, every crushing plate was precisely functional. He trusted the machine, and the machine was the extension of his relentless will. The Willow Creek District routine began with the first scrape of steel against concrete. The mechanical swoosh crunch of the compactor started its daily rhythm. Today Marcus focused less on the weight and more on the detail. He moved with a hyper-awareness born of the near failure on Elder Street. Every hop-out, every bin grip, every lift was a conscious decision, a disciplined act of control over the chaos of the refuse. As the sun crept above the horizon, painting the smog with pale, sickly oranges and grays, Marcus navigated the tight alleys, pulling the heavy, overflowing bins from the backs of dilapidated storefronts. He saw the discarded remnants of lives, the failed hopes and forgotten potential, but today, the sight brought a different perspective. These remnants were the proof of human impermanence, but his work, his persistence, fueled by love, was the single permanent fact in his chaotic life. He wasn't defined by the decay he collected. He was defined by the relentless engine of love that drove him into it. He answered, his voice rough. Thorne. On the other end, the voice was professionally distant, crisp, and completely unfeeling. The voice of Miss Peterson, the hospital's financial coordinator. Mr. Thorne, I am calling regarding Clara Willowthorne's scheduled specialized imaging next week. She began, the tone instantly plunging Marcus into a cold dread far worse than the November air. Yes? Is there a scheduling issue? Marcus gripped the edge of the hopper, his knuckles white. No, mister. There is a financial issue. Due to the recent increase in necessary specialized pharmaceuticals, which, as you know, are considered non-essential benefits following the city's failed bid adjustments, we require an immediate supplemental payment. $5,000 must be received by the close of business this Friday. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. $5,000. Immediate. It was not the total debt represented by the medical invoice stack, but an acute, non-negotiable spike that represented a full 2 months of his total take-home pay, even with the exhaustive overtime. Ms. Peterson, you know I pay every week. I am current on the installment plan. The installment plan covers the baseline facility fees, mister. This is for the specialized high-cost contrast media and the radiologist's fee for the interpretation. It is strictly upfront, if we do not receive this payment. The diagnostic imaging, which your doctor has stressed, is crucial for assessing Clara's current response to the new. Therapy will be postponed indefinitely. The word postponed felt like a sledgehammer blow. Indefinitely. That meant Clara's precarious stability would crumble. His entire mission, his relentless adherence to routine, was predicated on ensuring the medical process moved forward without interruption. Friday, Marcus repeated, the single word, horse. It was Wednesday morning. He had less than 48 hours. Yes, close of business. We accept cashier's checks or certified bank transfers. Thank you, mister. The line went dead, replaced by the deafening silence of the abandoned alleyway, soon shattered by the crunch of Unit 734's compactor. This was the crisis. This was the immediate suffocating test of his resilience. The systemic burden had shifted from a heavy, constant weight to a sudden, crushing deadline. Marcus finished the Willow Creek route in a blind, frantic haze, pushing Unit 734 to its absolute limits, driving with a controlled recklessness that risked another missed street pickup. He knew instinctively that even with working every hour until Friday, he couldn't earn $5,000. He had some savings, a small, carefully guarded emergency fund meant for true catastrophe, which amounted to maybe $1,800. He dumped his full load at the transfer station and returned to the sanitation hub, skipping his mandated midday rest. He found Jerry in the break room charting his next route. Marcus slammed his manifest down on the table. "I need every available shift, every hour, tonight, tomorrow. I don't care about the regulations." Jerry looked up, startled by the intensity in Marcus's usually stoic eyes. "Whoa, Thorne, what happened? Did St. Jude's call?" Marcus nodded grimly. 5,000. By Friday. Up front for the imaging. Jerry whistled, low and concerned. "That's barbaric. That's policy designed to break people." "I want break," Marcus vowed, "but I need the hours. Is there anything available? Anything the night crews won't touch?" "I'm desperate," Marcus confirmed. "Schedule me for tonight and tomorrow night." "It has to." Jerry saw the deep, focused determination, the fanatical edge that defined Marcus. He knew arguing was useless. "I'll call the foreman. But you owe me one, Thorne. If you collapse out there, I'm the one who has to fill out the paperwork." Marcus simply nodded. He knew the risk. The stability he promised Clara was dependent on his absolute total functionality. If he pushed past the point of function, the entire fragile structure collapsed. But the alternative, delaying Clara's crucial diagnosis, was unthinkable. He worked his scheduled afternoon route, his focus now split between the physical demands and the terrifying mental arithmetic of the deadline. He called his bank, arranging a small loan against his meager retirement funds, which would only yield an additional $1,500 after processing fees. He was still short. Significantly short. He worked through the night, the clock ticking relentlessly toward Friday. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest. He leveraged Unit 734 where he could. But much of the work involved manually rolling the heavy barrels onto custom lifts. He was wrestling with a barrel, a particularly dense one, marked 400 pounds, trying to secure the thick nylon straps for the winch lift. He pulled, using the last reserves of his strength, his tired eyes focused on the single task. Stability for Clara. Stability for Clara. The barrel shifted abruptly. Marcus's left foot, moving instinctively to brace, slipped on a patch of slick chemical residue hidden beneath the steel grating. The sudden asymmetrical pressure combined with the extreme fatigue was too much. A blinding, white-hot explosion of pain ripped through his lower back and down his leg. It wasn't just soreness, it was sharp, crippling, incapacitating. He gasped, dropping the straps and clutching his back. He collapsed against the cold, grimy floor, the heavy rubber suit hindering his ability to move. The respirator filtered his ragged breaths, making the panic feel oddly muffled. The physical breakdown, it had happened. The fear Jerry had warned him of, the collapse he had refused to accept as a luxury, had arrived as a brutal necessity. He lay there for a terrifying minute, unable to move, immobilized by the acute pain. The image of Miss Peterson's face, cold and uncompromising, flashed in his mind. Postponed indefinitely. The failure was total. He hadn't just made a logistical mistake. He had broken the machine. If he couldn't get up, he couldn't work. If he couldn't work, he couldn't get the remaining $1,700 he needed. If he failed now, he betrayed the sacred promise of stability. Marcus pushed past the pain, drawing on the deepest well of his stoicism. He rolled onto his side, a grunt escaping his throat despite his efforts to stay silent. He crawled, using his arms to drag his immobilized lower body, moving toward the nearest support pillar. He used the pillar to drag himself upright, teeth gritted against the relentless, radiating pain. He stood, shaky and drenched in cold sweat inside the rubber suit, but he was standing. He couldn't perform the manual lift. The 400 pounds. Barrel was an insurmountable obstacle. But he still had Unit 734. He stumbled to the cab, ignoring the flare of pain with every step. He needed to finish this barrel, secure the payment, and then figure out the rest. He put the massive truck into position, using the main hydraulic claw, designed for massive dumpsters, to carefully secure the 400 pounds barrel. He bypassed the manual winch entirely, relying on the machine's immense power to compensate for his broken body. He drove home, his body protesting every turn of the steering wheel. He couldn't afford to rest. He had to go to the bank, secure the loan draft, and immediately return for his regular route. But first, Clara. He slipped into the apartment, shedding the protective suit and the vest, leaving only the grim, exhausted man beneath. Clara was still asleep. He looked at her pale face, her knit beanie slightly askew. He needed to show her the stability, the persistence. He couldn't be broken, not when she was watching, even in sleep. He brewed the thick asphalt coffee. The pain was a constant, vicious companion now. He knew he couldn't lift anything heavy today. The Willow Creek route was impossible. Jerry was already there, looking anxious. "You look like hell warmed over. Did you sleep?" Jerry stared at the sheer, brutal determination in Marcus's tired eyes, then down at the payment confirmation. He saw the evidence of the physical collapse written in Marcus's posture. "You pushed it too far, Marcus," Jerry said, his usual cynicism replaced by profound concern. "I finished the shift," Marcus countered, the statement a defiant summary of his philosophy. "I refuse to yield." Jerry nodded slowly. "I believe you. But you're right. You lift one of those Willow Creek commercial bins today, you're looking at a herniated disc and 6 months of unpaid leave. We can't have that." Jerry went silent for a moment, processing the impossible situation. He looked at Marcus Thorne, the man who embodied persistence so completely it bordered on the divine, the man who sacrificed everything for his daughter. "All right," Jerry said, rubbing his temple. "I'll do the Willow Creek route for you. No pay exchange, no debt. Just do me a favor and let me pretend I have half the work ethic you do, okay?" Marcus felt a shock of emotion, a sudden unfamiliar warmth cutting through the cold pain. "Jerry, I can't ask you. You didn't ask," Jerry interrupted. "I'm offering—" "But you're right. We need to get that 900. And you need a job that doesn't involve crushing your spine." Jerry pulled up the digital dispatch board. The city sanitation department maintains an archive of old historical documents, city planning, architectural blueprints, stuff like that. They're moving the entire archive from the main depot to the municipal storage facility down by the industrial area. They need drivers for the sensitive documents. Zero lifting, pure security, transportation, and careful paperwork. It pays standard, but they'll give you a full 8 hours straight through. Marcus looked at the listing. It wasn't enough to make $900, but it was stability. It was income without physical exertion. "I need more," Marcus said, still fixated on the Friday deadline. "How do I apply?" "You can't. It has to be nominated by a supervisor." Jerry smiled, a rare, genuine expression of human kindness cutting through the exhaustion. "I'm going to nominate you, Thorne. I'm going to tell the foreman exactly what you've done over the past 48 hours. I'm going to tell him that your level of fanatical commitment to this job, despite the city's cuts, warrants the maximum possible payout from that fund. It won't cover the full $900, but it will close the gap enough that we can make up the rest with the archive shift." Marcus felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, but his stoic nature prevented a verbal explosion. He simply met Jerry's gaze, his tired, bloodshot eyes conveying the full weight of his thanks. "Thank you, Vance." Jerry clapped him lightly on the shoulder, avoiding the injury. "Get that archive shift done. I'll fight the paperwork war here. And when you get paid for the shift and the fund hits, you go straight to St. No Detours." Marcus took the manifest for the archive transport. It was a completely different kind of work. Sterile, quiet, focused entirely on the careful movement of historical records, a stark contrast to the rough, visceral labor of refuse collection. It required the focus of his mind, not the strength of his back. He spent Thursday driving a small, climate-controlled van, transporting boxes of decaying city blueprints. He moved with meticulous care, the slow, precise work forcing him to inhabit a space of mental focus. He was acutely aware of the throbbing pain in his back, a searing reminder of his near-fatal mistake. The pain, however, was no longer a symbol of failure. It was the physical testament to his refusal to yield. He had bent, but he had not broken. By the time he finished the shift and returned the van, the Dignity Fund had been approved, a $500 transfer. Coupled with the archive shift pay and the existing funds, Marcus was finally and possibly ahead of the deadline. He spent Thursday evening securing the remaining funds as a certified bank check. The total came to $5,050. He bypassed the sanitation hub entirely. He dressed in clean, functional clothing, leaving the orange utility vest hanging by the door, a silent monument to the 72-hour siege he had just endured. He drove directly to St. He, went to the administrative office, and presented the check to Miss Peterson. She took the paper, her expression unreadable, then meticulously counted the numbers. $5,050. Received, she stated, sliding a receipt across the counter. The diagnostic imaging is confirmed for Monday. The transaction was complete. The immediate threat was neutralized. The stability was preserved. Marcus stood there for a moment, clutching the sterile receipt. It was not a moment of celebration, but of profound, quiet confirmation. The physical struggle, the exhaustion, the pain, the terror of the missed street pickup, the betrayal of his own body, it had all culminated in this simple piece of paper. His dedication had produced the outcome. He visited Clara. She was sitting up watching a children's cartoon, a small knitted toy clutched in her hand. "Papa," she whispered, her eyes lighting up. Marcus sat beside her, allowing her to lean her frail weight against his good shoulder. He didn't mention the check, the pain, or the deadlines. "I just came to see you," he said. "They're going to do the big scan on Monday," Clara mentioned casually. "The nurse said it's important. She said they needed to make sure they had everything ready." "They do," Marcus confirmed, looking at the receipt in his pocket. He had cleared the path. He had refused to yield to the systemic burdens, and in doing so, he had secured her continuity of care. Later that afternoon, Marcus returned home. The orange utility vest hung silently on the hook. He looked at the medical invoice stack. It was still there, the vast, unforgiving weight of the future. But the critical summit had been conquered. He thought back to the dawn realization, the profound moment of clarity in the darkness of the hub. He hadn't needed a miraculous cure or a lottery win. He had only needed to understand the value of his own unwavering effort. He was Marcus Thorne, the garbage collector. His job was thankless, brutal, and invisible. But the true hope he sought was the profound realization that his dedication itself was the greatest contribution he could make. His strength was measured not by what he achieved, he hadn't erased the debt, but by what he refused to give up. He had refused to give up his dignity, his labor, and his promise to Clara. The path forward was illuminated not by blinding success, but by the dull, fierce glow of persistence. He was the anchor, and he would not move. He slept deeply that night, his mind finally at rest, knowing the system had tested him to the point of breaking, and he had pushed back, powered solely by the relentless engine of paternal love. He would meet the darkness again, but this time he would meet it as a confirmed victor in the long, quiet war of endurance. His resilience was his truth, his dignity was his wealth, and his love was the measure of his unyielding strength. The world would wake up to the sun, and Marcus Thorne would continue his work, transforming sacrifice into stability, day after grueling day. He had won the immediate battle, but the war had left a scar deeper than any scrape on his calloused hands. The pain was crippling, mocking his philosophy that resilience was a constant, unlimited resource. His stoicism had pushed him through, but physics demanded its payment. He rose slowly, moving with the meticulous caution of someone defusing a bomb. Every small action, the pivot from the bed, the slow transfer of weight to his feet, was calculated, measured against the searing potential for agony. He made it to the kitchen and stood staring at the counter.
Okay.
The medical invoice stack was still there. Its physical presence felt diminished only slightly. The $5,050 payment had bought a critical procedure, a diagnostic step, but it hadn't bought solvency. It was a triage bandage on a hemorrhaging wound. He brewed coffee, leaning heavily against the counter, minimizing the strain on his core. He hadn't told Clara about the back injury. His physical vulnerability was the one thing he felt he absolutely had to hide. Clara, 8 years old, needed to see the unyielding father, the permanent fixture who left and returned, always functional, always stable. If she saw him compromised, saw the machine sputter, her own fragile foundation might crack. Clara emerged from her room wearing her knit beanie and rubbing sleep from her eyes. She moved with her usual quiet grace, a learned economy of movement necessitated by her chronic condition. "Morning, Papa," she murmured, her voice soft. "Morning, sweet pea," Marcus replied, his voice rough but controlled. He moved carefully to place a mug of watered-down tea in front of her. She noticed the difference immediately. She was attuned to his subtle rhythms, registering the fractional change in his posture, or the fractional delay in his movements. "Why are you moving so slowly?" she asked, her gaze direct, unwavering. She had her mother's eyes, deep brown, perceptive. Marcus forced a smile, a rare, strained movement of his facial muscles. "Just tired. I got the special delivery job done, remember? It involved a lot of standing around and waiting." He omitted the part about dragging his crippled body across a chemically soaked floor to avoid failing his mission. Clara simply accepted the answer, not pressing, which was her way. She inherently understood the boundaries of her father's sacrifice. She knew his life was structured around her needs, and she seldom burdened him with unnecessary inquiries. She was, as always, his moral anchor, holding him accountable not by demands, but by her quiet, hopeful presence. They spent the morning in the small apartment, the silence punctuated only by the occasional clinking of teacups and the muffled noise of the city outside. Marcus spent hours organizing the meager savings he had left, meticulously documenting the flow of funds to account for every dollar paid, every dollar owed. This act of control, of reducing the financial chaos to neat rows of figures, was another necessary form of meditation. It transformed the crushing weight of systemic burdens into a quantifiable challenge, something he could confront with his steely mathematical focus. In the early afternoon, the buzzer rang. Marcus frowned. He rarely had visitors. He opened the door to find Jerry standing there, bundled up against the cold, holding a six-pack of cheap beer and a heavy, grease-stained paper bag. "Sup, Thorne?" "You better be resting," Jerry said, stepping inside without waiting for permission. Jerry's presence always brought the scent of diesel, stale cigarette smoke, and a rough but genuine camaraderie. "I'm resting," Marcus confirmed, carefully moving to stand behind the counter, leaning slightly to hide the pain. Clara looked up, smiling politely at Jerry. "Hi, Jerry." "Hey, kiddo. Heard you got the big scan scheduled for Monday." "Good news." Jerry tossed the six-pack onto the counter. "I brought pizza. Your dad needs calories, not coffee." Marcus appreciated the gesture, particularly the pizza, which Clara loved and which was a luxury they rarely afforded. He knew Jerry wasn't here just for a social call. Jerry was checking on the damage. As Clara disappeared into her room with 2 slices, Jerry lowered his voice, his usual cynical exhaustion replaced by genuine concern. Marcus clenched his jaw. "It's tight. I can't lift. I'll be fine by Tuesday." "No, you won't," Jerry countered flatly. "I saw how you looked when you came in Thursday morning. That wasn't just tired, that was serious. You think you can go back to Willow Creek hauling 20 tons of garbage with a blown disc?" Marcus looked away, toward the orange utility vest hanging by the door. "I have to. Clara needs to see me going to work." "She needs to see you alive and walking in 10 years, Jerry retorted, his voice hardening slightly. "Listen, I covered your shift yesterday, and I'll take Willow Creek again tomorrow, Sunday. We'll tell dispatch you're on special documentation logistics, that archive job. It buys us until Tuesday." Marcus hated accepting the charity, the blurring of the professional lines that he fought so hard to maintain. His purpose was to be self-sufficient, to earn the stability, not borrow it. "I'll pay you for the hours, Vance." Jerry waved him off dismissively. "Shut up, Marcus. This isn't about money. This is about keeping the most ridiculously committed man I know from collapsing. That $500 dignity fund payout? That was my political capital. You need to sustain the effort now. You just proved you won't quit. Now prove you know how to survive." Jerry's words hit Marcus hard. Prove you know how to survive. The dawn realization had been about persistence, but maybe survival required a different form of strength. The strength to accept help. The strength to heal. "Monday," Marcus said finally. "I need to be at St. Jude's first thing. I won't be able to get to the hub until almost noon. I'll handle the paperwork," Jerry promised. "Just get through Monday, get the results, and rest your damned back." Jerry finished his beer and left, leaving the small apartment slightly warmer than it had been before, both physically and emotionally. Marcus spent the rest of the weekend in enforced idleness. The hours stretched, heavy and unnatural. He read to Clara from a battered copy of Moby Dick, finding a grim kinship with Ahab's singular, obsessive pursuit, though Marcus's quest was fueled by love, not vengeance. Sunday night was tense. Clara was unusually quiet, her subtle, hopeful humor subdued. She knew Monday was the day the doctors would look deep inside her, assessing whether the relentless treatment, the medication, the cost, the sacrifice was working. "Papa," she asked quietly, wrapped in her thick duvet, "what if it's not enough?" Marcus sat beside her, running his rough thumb along the brim of her knit beanie. He felt the sharp, terrifying fear that he had successfully suppressed for days now rise up. This was the true uncertainty, the biological reality that transcended his financial efforts. "We find out exactly what is needed, Clara," Marcus said, choosing his words carefully. "That's what this scan is for. It gives us clarity, and then we fight that fight just like we fought the one before it. We never quit. It's a decision we make every day." She nodded, seemingly reassured by the sheer, unyielding commitment in his voice. She was seeking the stability he offered, the quiet assurance that he would meet any crisis with the same fanatical dedication. He drove Clara to St. Jude's pediatric wing. The clinical environment. usually a site of financial anxiety for Marcus, felt different today. It was the arena where the biological stakes were highest. The pastel walls, the plastic toys, the enforced cheerfulness now felt less mocking and more simply irrelevant. They waited in the clean, sterile waiting room. Marcus watched the other parents all carrying their own invisible stacks of invoices, their own secret promises of resilience. He saw the shared look in their eyes, the constant exhaustion, the forced optimism, the desperate hope that was indeed a decision forged daily against all odds. The nurses called Clara back. Marcus followed her to the prep area. He helped her onto the narrow examination table, ensuring she was comfortable, adjusting her beanie. "I'll be right outside, sweet pea," he promised. "I know," she said, squeezing his hand. "You never quit." He left the room, returning to the waiting area. The wait for the imaging procedure felt like an eternity compressed into 90 minutes. He didn't sit. He stood by the window, watching the city outside begin its chaotic morning rush. He thought of Jerry, already out in the Willow Creek district, wrestling the overflowing bin so Marcus didn't have to. The strength to survive, as Jerry had said, sometimes meant accepting the burden shared. Finally, the procedure was complete. Burrow was wheeled out, sleepy but smiling. Marcus took her back to the waiting room and they waited for the doctor to review the initial scans. Dr. Chun, Clara's pediatric oncologist, arrived an hour later, pulling Marcus into a small, windowless consultation room. The doctor, a woman of sharp intelligence and weary kindness, sat down across from him. "Mr. Thorne," Dr. Chun began, her voice low and measured. Marcus steeled himself. He was ready for the worst news, ready for a new, insurmountable hurdle. He placed his hands flat on his knees, bracing for impact. "The good news is that the new specialized medication, the one we had to push through the budget cuts to get, is working effectively. The specific markers we were worried about are receding. The therapy is viable." However, Dr. Chun continued, the word pulling Marcus back to earth, the imaging confirmed that while the medical intervention is working, Clara's immune system is dangerously compromised. The intensity of the chronic illness requires a sustained, aggressive maintenance protocol for the next 18 months. This means she needs a specialized filtration system installed in your home. The air quality in the Willow Creek district, especially during the approaching winter months, is simply too poor. The particulates, the pollution, it's actively undermining the efficacy of the treatment. Marcus felt the weight return, heavier now, because it was coupled with the taste of near victory. "A filtration system?" Marcus asked. "Yes, specialized medical grade. It's extremely expensive, non-covered by insurance, and we need it installed before the severe cold hits. We estimate the cost to be around $7,500 for installation and the first year of maintenance. $7,500. It was a fresh mountain, immediately following the brief respite of conquering the first one. It was more than the down payment for the imaging. It was the next systemic burden, tailored specifically to his low-income reality in the Willow Creek district, the very environment he had to work in to pay for her. Care was now actively killing her. Chun saw the stoic mask falter for a moment. "I know this is crushing, Mr. Thorne, but this is the new stability. We can keep the illness in remission, but we have to control her environment." "Thank you, doctor," Marcus said, his voice flat. "We will have the funding." He returned to Clara, telling her the core news. The medicine was working. She glowed with relief and genuine joy. Her small smile was the only currency that mattered. He drove her home, dropping her off with a promise to return immediately after his shift. He kissed her forehead, inhaling the faint, sweet scent of hospital soap mixed with her knitting yarn. Marcus drove directly to the sanitation hub, pulling up to Unit 734 just before noon. He found Jerry prepping for his afternoon run. "How was St. Jude's?" Jerry asked immediately, sensing the immense tension radiating off Marcus. Marcus summarized the results quickly. Success on the medicine, disaster on the new requirement. $7,500 for filtration. It has to be done now. Jerry leaned against the truck, shaking his head slowly. "They just keep moving the goalposts, don't they? They take the benefits, then they demand you clean up their environmental negligence. It's a rigged system, Marcus." "I have to clear Willow Creek today," Marcus stated, walking toward his truck. "I need the hours." Jerry blocked his path. "Absolutely not. You are not lifting a single bin with that back. If you re-injure yourself now, you're done. Clara's stability ends, and so does yours. I need the money, Jerry. I'm running Willow Creek today. I know the routes. I know the heavy spots. You can take the smaller residential area south of the river. The light commercial route. It's mostly recycling bins and small bags. No heavy lifting. You can use the automated arm exclusively. Marcus hesitated. Accepting Jerry's help meant accepting that his physical machine was temporarily broken, but it allowed the income stream to continue. It was survival, the new form of strength. I accept, Marcus ground out. But you're logging my hours and I'll log yours. The difference in pay is a debt, Vance. Whatever you say, Marcus, Jerry replied, knowing the debt would never be called in. Just stay safe. Marcus drove Unit 734 south, toward the light commercial route. He performed the shift differently. He didn't hop out nearly as often. He drove slower, focusing entirely on the logistics of maneuvering the massive truck and utilizing the automated hydraulic arm to perfection, making every move economical, minimizing strain. It was in this light, less grueling labor that Marcus had time for deep reflection. The physical pain was a constant reminder of the fragility of his frame. But the new burden, the $7,500, was a reminder that his purpose wasn't to escape the grinding labor, but to transform his daily burden into a relentless engine of love. He collected the refuse, bags of documents, thin plastic containers, the discarded evidence of trivial, fleeting transactions. He realized the profound, bitter irony of his life. He was tasked with cleaning up the physical decay of the city, only to discover that the systemic decay, the budgetary cuts, the environmental neglect was threatening his daughter's very breath. But the clarity Marcus had gained in the first dawn realization remained unshaken. He would not yield. He started doing the mental arithmetic again. He would work the full week, all overtime possible on light-duty routes. He would reapply for loans. He would find other small, secure transportation gigs. He would maintain his perfect attendance, ensuring the base salary remained untouched. A fierce, defiant constant against the chaotic demands of the disease. He spent the evening not at home, but at the main city library, using their free Wi-Fi, researching medical air filtration systems and grants for medically compromised children living in polluted urban areas. He gathered names, addresses, and applications. He was transforming his resilience from a purely physical effort into a relentless administrative one. He worked Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday on the light routes, swapping shifts with Jerry, who covered the heavy commercial runs. The arrangement was an unspoken truce, a mutual recognition of Marcus's essential, non-negotiable mission. On Thursday night, Marcus secured a small, high-interest loan that would cover $4,000 of the filtration cost. He was still short $3,500. He sat at the kitchen table late that night, staring at the growing stack of new documents related to the air filtration system. He looked at the medical invoice stack for St. Jude's, which was already beginning to accumulate new bills for the maintenance protocol. The wait was relentless. He had expected the results of the scan to bring a conclusion, a finish line. Instead, it had simply revealed a new, more distant horizon. This was the true nature of his sacrifice. It would never end. It was not a race to be won, but a commitment to be eternally sustained. The understanding solidified into his final, comprehensive realization. His life was not about escaping the grime and decay. It was about living within it, mastering it, and using the very tools of his undervalued labor: persistence, stoicism, and dedication to build a shelter of stability for Clara. He woke Friday morning, knowing he still needed $3,500. He felt the dull ache in his back, a permanent reminder of his fragility, but the fear was gone. It had been replaced by a fierce, quiet certainty. Jerry was there waiting, drinking coffee. "You're early. Back still holding up?" "It is," Marcus confirmed. "I need to talk to the foreman." I found an industrial cleaning contract that requires a crew. It pays hourly, plus hazard bonuses. You want to work your light route, then another 8-hour shift to floor sealing, and then come back for another light route?" Jerry asked, aghast. "It covers the $3,500 by Monday morning." Jerry looked at Marcus, seeing the fanatical focus, the eyes constantly tired and bloodshot, but absolutely fixed on the target. He didn't see exhaustion. He saw a singular, unyielding engine of love. "You're unbelievable, Thorne," Jerry muttered, shaking his head. "I'll talk to the foreman. But you eat something tonight, you hear me?" "You hear me. Real food. I'll cover your morning prep time." Marcus nodded. "Thank you, Vance." Marcus spent Friday running the light commercial route, maneuvering Unit 734 with precision. He felt a quiet pride in the quality of his work, even in the absence of heavy lifting. He was transforming his burden, using the system's own rigidity, the need for reliable labor, to his advantage. When he finished his sanitation route, he drove immediately to the manufacturing facility. He spent the next 8 hours walking behind a massive floor scrubber, the machine doing the heavy work, his job being to guide it meticulously around columns and machinery. It was tedious, loud work, but it paid the hazard bonus, and his back remained stable. "Papa, you're late," she whispered. "It's just a special project," Marcus explained, sitting beside her. "I had to drive a machine that cleans floors." "It was very big. You look sleepy," she observed. "I am," he admitted, allowing a fractional moment of vulnerability. "But I got a lot done. Things are moving forward." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. "I knew you wouldn't quit." Marcus held her close. Never. He completed the floor-sealing job over the weekend, pushing through the noise, the fatigue, and the endless repetitive motion. By Sunday evening, he had the final paycheck and the secured loan. $7,500 was acquired. The stability was purchased. The filtration system was ordered. Marcus sat at his kitchen table late Sunday night, November 2024. He looked at the vast, intimidating medical invoice stack, now flanked by the new filtration invoices. The debt was immense, the sacrifice unending, but he had proven it again. He had taken the crippling physical failure, the systemic betrayal of the failed bid, the shock of the $7,500 demand, and he had met them all with unyielding effort. He was the invisible force that cleared the detritus, the silent engine that allowed his daughter's life to proceed. Today, Monday, was not just the start of the endless cycle. It was the start of the new math. He had the $7,500, but the interest payments on the short-term loan were astronomical, a systemic tax on his low-income desperation. Every hour he worked now had to pay for yesterday's sacrifice and tomorrow's maintenance. He dressed meticulously, pulling on the orange utility vest, the fabric heavy and familiar against his shoulders. It no longer felt like a mere uniform. It was a suit of armor forged in the furnace of necessity. He left the apartment, the air already thick with the damp industrial chill of November 2024. He didn't drive Unit 734 to the Willow Creek District today. That was still Jerry's temporary assignment. Marcus headed south to the light commercial route, using the automated hydraulic arm with the surgical precision born of fatigue and necessity. When Marcus returned that evening, the change was immediate and palpable. Clara's room, usually smelling faintly of stale air and medication, now held a distinct sterile scent, a quiet, almost cold cleanliness. The machine hummed with a low, unwavering pitch, a mechanical heartbeat fighting the environmental decay outside. Clara, wrapped in her thickest duvet, had watched the vents with fascination. "It sounds like the inside of St. Jude's," she had observed quietly. "It keeps the bad stuff out, sweet pea," Marcus had replied. "It keeps the stability in." Now, driving the slow, monotonous route, Marcus focused on the debt. The medical invoice stack had metastasized. To the St. Jude's bills and the initial diagnosis costs were added the filtration system invoices, the high-interest loan documentation, and the quarterly maintenance projections, an almost physical representation of the crushing weight of systemic burdens. He spent his break in the cab of the truck, not eating the meager sandwich he'd packed, but meticulously updating his spreadsheets in a small, worn notebook. He tracked the loan amortization schedule, projecting the exact date, 14 months away, when the principal would finally be manageable. This act of control, of reducing the financial hydra to predictable numbers, was his antidote to despair. Weeks bled into December. The early winter of 2024 tightened its grip on the city. The sanitation hub was a maze of steaming breath, diesel fumes, and frozen metal. The routine, though less physically demanding than the heavy routes, was mentally taxing. The cold was a constant, seeping adversary. Jerry continued to cover Willow Creek, noticing the subtle but important change in Marcus's approach. Marcus was no longer driven solely by brute force. He was now a calculating strategist, prioritizing longevity over immediate performance. "Psh, you look like you haven't slept since the filtration job, Thorne," Jerry commented one icy morning, stamping his feet in the pre-dawn darkness near the diesel pump. Marcus, sipping scalding black coffee, didn't look up from checking his hydraulic lines. "I'm sleeping. I'm just maximizing the non-working hours." "Which means you're spending all night reading loan documents and grant applications," Jerry countered, lighting a cigarette that seemed to instantly freeze in the air. "You bought the stability, Marcus. Now you have to live long enough to sustain it." "That's the goal," Marcus replied, the statement devoid of warmth or inflection. Survival is the new persistence. Marcus had indeed pivoted. He was relentlessly applying for obscure city grants and medical financial aid programs. learning the obtuse, frustrating language of bureaucracy. He was transforming his fanatical dedication into administrative resilience. The system had tried to beat him with price. He would fight back with paperwork, ensuring every single dollar he earned was matched by a dollar the system was legally obliged to provide. It was slow, tedious work that stole his sleep, but it was essential to maintaining the $7,500 commitment without incurring lethal long-term debt. He secured a small, non-repayable grant for low-income housing upgrades due to chronic illness, contingent on maintaining perfect records of the filtration system. The relief wasn't joy. It was the quiet satisfaction of a debt neutralized. He had fought the system and won a small critical victory. One Saturday afternoon, while Marcus was reorganizing the tools in the utility closet, Clara brought him a drawing. It was a crayon picture of a brightly colored city street, oddly clean, dominated by a large orange truck. Inside the truck cab, a stick figure man was driving. "What's this?" Marcus asked, his voice softer than usual. "That's the Stability," Clara said simply, pointing to the truck. "You drive it every day, even when it's cold." Marcus looked at the picture, the bright, almost unreal depiction of his grueling work. He saw the world through her eyes, not as a landscape of grime and decay, but as a path to permanence, driven by his refusal to yield. The true test of his newly defined hope arrived 2 weeks before Christmas, striking with the brutal indifference of nature. Marcus woke, the house cold despite the heating system struggling. He checked Clara. The filtration unit hummed steadily, its blue indicator light glowing fiercely, working overtime to battle the sharp, freezing air filtering in from the outside. Jerry was slumped in the dispatch office, shivering violently. "Thorne, don't even bother with the light route. Dispatch needs you on the main commercial arteries, the city center. They're running skeleton crews just to keep the main roads clear. You'll be running Unit 734 today, but you're not collecting. You're clearing the big bins from the loading docks for the emergency response teams. Heavy duty, maximum lift. We're short on hydraulics." Marcus nodded, accepting the new parameters instantly. The mission shifted from collection to emergency support. The goal remained the same: presence, competence, and securing the maximum hourly wage. The risk to his back was immense, but the need was immediate. He pulled on a thicker jacket over the orange utility vest, the fabric stiff with cold. "Be careful, Marcus," Jerry warned, his voice grave. "That district is exposed. The wind chill is insane. Don't push that truck past its limits." "I won't," Marcus promised. Unit 734 grumbled to life, the diesel struggling to turn over in the deep cold. The hydraulic arm whined in protest as Marcus tested it. He spent the next 5 hours in a brutal, isolating ballet of steel and ice. He navigated the frozen downtown streets, the massive tires of the truck slipping and catching on the compacted snow. He relied heavily on the automated arm, swinging it out to grip the massive 10-yard commercial bins, lifting and crushing the industrial waste, the discarded packaging, the frozen food remnants, the debris of commerce. Each lift sent a tremor through the cab, testing the limits of his healing back. He worked with a deliberate slowness, prioritizing safety and control over speed. He finished emptying a particularly heavy steel bin, the weight of frozen liquid inside making the lift agonizingly slow, and retracted the arm. He shifted into drive. Nothing happened. Marcus tried again. Reverse. Neutral. Drive. The engine roared, the truck idled perfectly, but the transmission would not engage. The tires remained locked. He cursed internally, a silent, weary expression of frustration. He knew instantly the deep cold combined with the stress of the heavy load had compromised the ancient hydraulic fluid in the transmission linkage. Unit 734, the engine of his Stability, was now a 2-story block of frozen metal, stuck on a deserted, snow-choked street. He immediately tried the radio. Static. The storm had downed communication lines in this part of the city. He was isolated, exposed to the deep freeze, and critically, stalled on a mandatory emergency route. He sat in the cab for a full 5 minutes, forcing himself into complete stillness. He regulated his breathing, fighting the rising panic. He was physically exhausted from the high-stress, high-exertion morning. His back ached with a dull, throbbing intensity that felt systemic. This was the true test of his resilience, the ultimate confrontation with his fear. If he quit now, he broke the sacred vow to Clara. He showed her the possibility of despair. Marcus knew the core issue was likely frozen hydraulic fluid in the linkage, an agonizingly difficult fix that required getting underneath the truck in the blinding cold. He opened the cab door. The blizzard hit him instantly, a physical, biting force that stole his breath. The temperature was unforgiving. He could feel the cold begin to penetrate his heavy jacket within seconds. He retrieved the large, heavy toolkit and the small bottle of emergency dicer fluid from the storage compartment. He laid down on the slick, frozen pavement under the truck. The space beneath Unit 734 was dark, oily, and intensely cold. Snow was already drifting in, mixing with the grime. He worked by touch, his gloved fingers quickly becoming clumsy and useless against the frozen bolts and lines. The pain in his back flared instantly, a sharp, searing protest as he twisted his torso to reach the seized transmission valve. He had to maneuver his body around frozen axles and dangling wires, using his strained core muscles to leverage his weight. I have to move slowly, calculated. He recited his internal mantra, transforming the agony into a focus point. Resilience is a decision. Stability is earned. The work was painstaking. He used the small bottle of de-icer, soaking the critical linkage points, waiting agonizing minutes for the chemical warmth to take effect in the sub-zero environment. Every movement was a struggle, amplified by the heavy machinery and the paralyzing cold. He thought of Clara, not of her illness or the bills, but of her quiet, unwavering trust. He was her anchor. He could not, would not allow the systemic failure of the weather or the truck's machinery to break his perfect record of commitment. After 40 minutes of brutal, freezing labor, Marcus finally managed to loosen the critical valve just enough to allow the semi-gelled fluid to flow slightly. He climbed out from under the truck, shaking violently, his face white with cold and strain. He was close to hypothermia, his movements slow and clumsy. He scrambled back into the cab, forcing his mind to ignore the blinding ache in his back. He needed to generate heat. He started the engine again, letting it run hot for 5 minutes, hoping the internal warmth would circulate enough to finish the thaw. He shifted the transmission. Clunk. The gears engaged. Unit 734 was moving. A wave of dizzying relief hit him, powerful enough to almost make him weep. It wasn't the relief of saving his job. It was the relief of maintaining the promise. But he was critically behind schedule. He had lost nearly an hour in the deep freeze. He now had to speed up his route, risking further injury, or clock out late, risking the same disciplinary failure. He made a calculation. The risk of speeding was too high. A single slip on the ice could total the truck or end his career. He would finish the route meticulously and accept the late clockout, but he would not miss the collection. He would demonstrate that the work was complete, the commitment honored, even if the logistics were flawed. He continued his route, pushing through the last 3 miles of heavy-duty collection with renewed, fierce focus. The snow continued to fall, transforming the city into a white, chaotic void. He pulled Unit 734 into its bay, the truck groaning in mechanical exhaustion. He dismounted, moving stiffly, every muscle fiber screaming in protest. He walked straight to the time clock, his heavy boots crunching on the frozen grit of the floor. Jerry was waiting by the clock, wrapped in a thick wool coat. His expression was a mixture of fear and admiration. "Thorne, you're 18 minutes late. We were about to call the city rescue crew. We thought you were dead or stuck." Marcus ignored the question. He reached for his time card. His hand was shaking too hard from the cold and exhaustion to insert it smoothly. Jerry gently took the card from him and slid it into the slot. Marcus looked at the timestamp. He had broken his perfect record of efficiency. But he had not missed the work. He had not quit. "The route is complete, Vance," Marcus said, his voice a raw whisper. "The truck is intact. Log the collection tonnage." Jerry stared at him, seeing the grime, the ice-crusted orange utility vest, the bloodshot, fiercely focused eyes. Jerry didn't see a sanitation worker. He saw the epitome of defiant commitment. "The foreman already knows about the breakdown, Marcus. He knows you fixed it in the field in this weather." Hayes pissed about the truck, but impressed by the tenacity. Jerry paused, lowering his voice. "I told him you came in early, ran the heavy route, and saved the city's major artery bins from overflow. You took the extra 18 minutes to ensure Unit 734 was safe, rather than rushing. I told him this was commitment, not failure." Marcus said nothing. He simply accepted the quiet lobbying, the protection Jerry offered, which was another critical component of survival. "Go home, Marcus," Jerry ordered. "Get warm. You nearly froze out there. I'll handle the truck documentation." Marcus walked slowly out of the sanitation hub, the weight of the day pressing down on him. He drove the small personal car back to Willow Creek, the wipers struggling against the relentless snow. He arrived home. The apartment was warm, protected by the steady, sterile hum of the filtration system. Clara was asleep, her quiet, peaceful breathing the only sound. He stood in her doorway, watching her small form under the duvet. He was 18 minutes late on his punch card, facing immense new debt from the filtration system, and physically compromised from the freezing struggle. Yet his soul felt lighter, purified by the crucible of the blizzard. The crisis of the deep freeze, the ultimate systemic and physical test, had synthesized his philosophy into an unshakable truth. His hope was not a cure. It was the absolute, non-negotiable certainty of his presence. It was the knowledge that regardless of the scale of the burden, financial, medical, or environmental, he would meet the challenge with the same methodical, enduring commitment. He had survived the deep freeze not because he was strong enough to lift the heaviest weight, but because he was stoic enough to refuse to quit when the weight threatened to crush him. He was the relentless engine of love, transforming the thankless labor into the path forward. His purpose was to clear the detritus of others so that his daughter could breathe clean air and see a father who never failed to return, who never failed to show up. Marcus showered, washing off the ice, grime, and the oil of Unit 734. He made himself a mug of black coffee and sat at the kitchen table. He looked at the vast medical invoice stack and the new loan documents. The fight was far from over. There would be new crises, new systemic burdens, new physical aches. But the fear of the unknown was gone, replaced by the profound, quiet realization born on that frozen street. His true strength was measured not by what he achieved, but by what he absolutely refused to surrender. He pulled out his notebook and calculated the adjusted figures for the late clockout, minimizing the financial impact. He was back to work, relentlessly reducing chaos to order. The stillness of the apartment on Tuesday morning, after the chaos of the deep freeze, was deceptive. Marcus moved with the residual stiffness of a man who had wrestled frozen steel for half a day. He felt the cold not just on his skin, but deep in his bones, a lingering reminder of the near catastrophe. The 18 minutes late on his time card felt like a physical weight, a smudge on the immaculate record he strove to maintain. The bureaucratic penalty for those minutes, while small, felt like a profound moral failure. He had guaranteed stability, and for 18 minutes the system had recorded instability. He drove Unit 734 back to the sanitation hub, the truck running smoothly now, the transmission fully thawed, a testament to his icy field repair. He reported directly to the dispatch office, expecting the reprimand. Foreman Hayes, a thick-set man whose face seemed permanently carved from granite, sat behind a cluttered desk, reviewing the incident report Jerry had filed. Hayes didn't look up immediately. The air in the office was thick with the smell of old coffee and institutional cleaner. Marcus stood rigidly, the wet grime from his jacket melting onto the linoleum floor. He knew better than to offer excuses. Excuses were for the weak. The transmission linkage froze due to the temperature drop and the heavy commercial load, sir, Marcus stated, his voice even. I ran diagnostics, located the freeze point, and executed a field thaw and repair using emergency diacer. I completed the entire mandated emergency route for Sector B, prioritized, securing the vehicle and completing the mission over clocking out on time. Hayes finally looked up. His eyes, usually narrowed with institutional suspicion, held a flicker of something Marcus rarely saw, acknowledgement of raw effort. Vance's report corroborates the field repair, Hayes admitted, tapping the report with a thick finger. A full breakdown would have cost the city thousands in salvage and lost service time. You saved the route, Thorne. You also put city equipment at risk and cost us 3 hours of shop time. I accept the disciplinary deduction for the late clockout, sir, Marcus confirmed, already projecting the lost wages and how they would impact the loan interest. Hayes leaned back, his chair creaking. The penalty for equipment compromise is usually a day's suspension. But given the conditions, and the fact that you completed the essential collections, I'll waive the suspension. Well, log it as a formal reprimand for equipment mismanagement. The 18 minutes is deducted, and you are assigned to non-hydraulic operations for the rest of the week until the truck is certified clean. Non-hydraulic. That meant more light routes, less pay, further delaying the momentum he needed to conquer the $7,500 debt and its spiraling interest. Marcus didn't argue. He had faced the system, presented his objective truth of tireless effort, and received the least punishing outcome. Survival was often found in accepting the marginal victory. He returned to his routine, but the focus shifted further away from brute strength. The new constraint light duty forced him to become a master logistician. He spent his work hours running small, contained residential routes outside of Willow Creek, utilizing the small rear loader trucks that required manual labor but involved bins that rarely weighed over 50 pounds. The reduced strain allowed his back to continue its slow, reluctant mend. A mandatory self-preservation measure Jerry had enforced, and which the foreman's reprimand now cemented. The greatest challenge now wasn't physical, it was administrative. Marcus was fighting the clock on the interest payments for the short-term loan that had funded the filtration system. That $4,000 loan was a parasitic drain, demanding meticulous attention. Every night after ensuring Clara was settled in her sterile humming room, Marcus sat at the kitchen table, the glow of the desk lamp illuminating the vast, growing medical invoice stack. He had developed a near-fanatical system for managing the bureaucracy. He created separate folders labeled contingency, amortization schedule, and grant compliance. The grant that covered a portion of the filtration system required endless documentation, maintenance logs, weekly air quality readings using a cheap monitor he had purchased, and detailed proof of income fluctuation. This paperwork became Marcus's new heavy lifting. The weight of the systemic burden was no longer measured in tonnage, but in complexity and the endless threat of a single missed signature or deadline nullifying his hard-won stability. He would sit for hours, meticulously transcribing his timesheets into ledgers, cross-referencing utility bills against the grant requirements, ensuring that the machine of his commitment remained perfectly calibrated. Jerry often came over on Tuesday nights, bringing takeout and quiet company. He saw Marcus hunched over the paperwork, the intensity in his eyes matching the focus he used to bring to lifting a 400-pound dumpster. "You're going to burn yourself out on paper, Thorne," Jerry observed one evening, watching Marcus triple-check a bank statement. "The paper's the engine now, Vance," Marcus replied without looking up. "The physical effort bought the time. The paperwork sustains the time. The moment I stop tracking the debt tracks me." He saw the administrative work as an extension of his duty to Clara. She needed the environment maintained as much as she needed the medicine. The grant compliance was non-negotiable stability. It was the only way to transform the crushing weight of systemic burdens, high interest, loans, and bureaucratic complexity into a quantifiable challenge he could defeat. The weeks leading up to Christmas were defined by this duality: light physical labor during the day, maximizing income without compromising his physical integrity, and relentless administrative labor at night, defending the financial ground he had gained. Clara noticed the change. Her father was home earlier, but he was always occupied with the paper project. She would watch him from the living room, curled up with her sketchbook. She learned the sound of the calculator buttons, the rhythmic scratching of his pen against the ledger paper, the frustrated sigh when a number didn't align. One evening, Clara brought her sketchbook to the kitchen table and began drawing beside him. Her drawings were detailed now, focusing not just on the orange truck but on the items around the house that represented safety. She drew the thick, pale gray filtration unit, giving it a stylized, cheerful blue light. She drew the stack of papers, rendering the medical invoice stack as a daunting, jagged mountain range. "Why is the mountain so big, Papa?" she asked, pointing at her drawing. Marcus gently pushed his ledger aside. He chose his words carefully, avoiding panic or fear. "That's the challenge, Sweet Pea. It's what we have to climb to keep the stability. See this?" He pointed to his own meticulously ordered spreadsheet, showing the incremental reduction of the loan principal. "Every time I work, every time I track the money, the mountain gets a little bit smaller. It's hard work, but we are winning." Clara didn't fully grasp the concept of amortization, but she understood the concept of effort and reward. She saw her father applying the same fanatical dedication he used to clear the streets to clearing the debt. The lesson in resilience was now being taught not through sheer physical might, but through intellectual, unwavering persistence against a complex, invisible enemy. "You never quit the mountain," she stated, touching the drawn peaks. "Never," Marcus confirmed. "It's a decision we make every day, Clara." His true return to the heavy work came in the first week of January 2025. The cold had eased slightly and the city's workload demanded the full use of his capacity. Hayes, satisfied with Unit 734's service record and Marcus's flawless timesheets during the light-duty period, reassigned him to the Willow Creek District, the core landscape of grime and decay. Marcus felt the difference immediately. The physical strain was immense, a shock to his recovering muscles, but he handled the route with a cold, controlled professionalism. He lifted the overflowing bins, the heavy, waterlogged cardboard, the discarded furniture, and the general refuse of the low-income area. As he worked, the landscape of decay was revealed to him with new clarity. He was no longer just hauling refuse. He was hauling the remnants of failed human endeavor, the physical manifestations of the systemic burdens others had succumbed to. He hoisted a large industrial bin behind an abandoned laundromat. Inside, among the usual filth, he saw a pile of discarded, brightly colored fabric swatches and half-finished design sketches, the remnants of a small, failed fashion venture. A few blocks later, he crushed a bin filled with eviction notices and children's broken plastic toys. He saw the cycle of despair and waste, and he realized with renewed force that his job was the ultimate confrontation with entropy. He was the one clearing the wreckage, not just physically but symbolically. His refusal to quit, his dedication to the thankless labor, was the only thing preventing his own life from becoming another pile of discarded potential. This was the true realization he had sought since the first dawn realization. His purpose wasn't to escape the orange vest and the grime, but to transform the daily burden into the engine of his dignity. The grime was the medium through which his love was expressed. The stability he had purchased with the $7,500 was fragile. He knew that the system, having demanded its pound of flesh, would continue to find new ways to test his commitment. The ultimate test arrived late in January. Marcus had successfully navigated the first 3 major loan payments for the filtration system, a victory hard-won through overtime and administrative vigilance. He was maintaining the grant compliance, and Clara's health remained stable, anchored by the clean air and the effective medication. He had approximately $850 remaining in his emergency savings, a painfully low figure, barely enough to cover a single unplanned truck repair or a week of Clara's specialized diet if he lost his job. He had vowed, deep in his stoic core, never to touch this fund unless it was a matter of life or death, a final line of defense against utter destitution. It was a final, brutal move by the systemic burdens he fought against. If he failed to pay the $785 by Friday, he would be suspended without pay until the equipment was compliant, effectively losing his job and compromising the entire financial structure he had built around Clara's care. If he paid it, he would drain the entirety of his emergency savings, leaving them exposed to any minor crisis. Marcus clenched his hands on the steering wheel, the calluses digging into the worn plastic. He felt the cold rage, not a chaotic anger, but a cold, measured fury at the injustice. They were forcing him to choose between the long-term safety net and the immediate, non-negotiable stability of his job. He needed to buy time. He drove Unit 734 out onto the route, the truck feeling heavier than usual, weighted by the $785 dilemma. He drove through the familiar streets of Willow Creek, the early morning darkness broken only by the cold yellow light of the sodium vapor lamps. He worked in a frenzy of focused determination. He ran the route faster than usual, performing the heavy lifts with machine-like efficiency, fueled by the cold calculation of his problem. He knew the maintenance clause was buried deep in the city's operational manual, a clause designed to trap him. He found the loophole. The clause regarding operator negligence was void if the operator could prove a critical, non-elective medical necessity superseded the financial capacity for the arbitrary charge. It was a narrow, almost unusable clause designed for catastrophic events, but Marcus realized he had all the necessary documentation. He had the medical invoice stack. He had the grant compliance forms. He had Dr. Chun's recent letter detailing Clara's need for the sterile environment purchased by the recently incurred $7,500 debt. He had the proof of a chronic, life-threatening condition that constituted a critical, non-elective medical necessity. He spent the rest of the day after his shift not sleeping but compiling a dossier. He printed copies of the filtration system invoices, the loan documents, and Clara's medical records with identifying information redacted. He structured his argument with the relentless logic of a man fighting for his life. This was the ultimate administrative battle, requiring not muscle but pure, defiant mental persistence. On Wednesday morning, Marcus bypassed the foreman and went straight to the city's sanitation legal liaison office's sterile, intimidating environment usually reserved for injury claims and complex policy disputes. He presented his dossier to a young, overwhelmed legal assistant named Miss Reynolds. He did not ask for clemency or a waiver. He presented his case as a simple statement of fact, charging him $785, violated the spirit and letter of the medical necessity clause, and suspending him would result in a lawsuit based on the systemic burden placed on medically compromised dependents. He stood silent after presenting the thick folder, letting the sheer volume of his documented sacrifice speak for itself. He was not begging. He was asserting his dignity of purpose. Miss Reynolds, visibly shaken by the gravity of the medical necessity evidence, promised a response by the end of the day. Marcus returned to work, running his second shift in a daze of anxious expectation. The tension was immense. The balance of his survival rested on a bureaucratic decision. That evening he got the call. Marcus felt the tension release, not with a burst of celebration, but a slow, quiet settling of his nerves. He had won. The system had tried to consume his last line of defense, and he had fought it back with paperwork and defiant persistence. The $785 remained in the emergency fund. He hung up the phone. He looked at the vast, intimidating medical invoice stack, now joined by the save from $785 notice. He had faced down the physical failure of his back, the systemic attack of the budget cuts, the environmental threat of the Willow Creek District, and the final financial trap of the city bureaucracy. The victory solidified his realization. Hope was not found in escaping the garbage route or achieving immediate financial freedom. Hope was found in the unwavering act of persistence itself. His dedication, his meticulous tracking, his stoic refusal to yield, was the engine of love that kept Clara alive. He realized the irony of his life was perfect. In the grime and decay of the city's refuse, he had found his greatest clarity and purpose. He was the anchor of stability, forged in the most thankless labor. He stood in Clara's doorway before leaving. She was sleeping soundly, the low, steady hum of the filtration unit a quiet declaration of stability. The air was clean, the promise kept. He knew the path ahead was endless. The maintenance on the filtration system would continue. New medical invoices would arrive. The loan interest would grind on. The city bureaucracy would devise new fees and regulations. His back would ache. He walked out into the cold, silent darkness of the Willow Creek District, heading toward Unit 734. The engine of love was running, and Marcus was at the wheel. The cycle began anew, fortified not by optimism, but by the relentless certainty of his own will. He would lift the world's refuse again, a decision made every day, securing the future, one perfectly completed route at a time. The hope wasn't a destination. It was the journey itself. The victory over the $785 charge, while essential, felt less like a triumph and more like a stalemate against an endlessly regenerating enemy. The system had retreated, but only to regroup. Marcus understood that bureaucracy, like entropy, was a constant force, seeking stability through the dissolution of individual effort. He had defended the emergency fund, but the stability he craved, true, lasting security for Clara, was still a distant, shimmering mirage on the horizon of his colossal debt. At the sanitation hub, the air hung thick and greasy, trapped by the descending thermal inversion. The fluorescent lights seemed colder, harsher. Marcus moved with an internal rigidity that had nothing to do with muscle soreness and everything to do with necessity. He layered up, the familiar orange utility vest fitting snugly over 3 thermal shirts. The vest was now more than a uniform. It was armor against the world. Jerry bundled tight in a thick woolen coat beneath his own vest, watched Marcus methodically check the tire pressure on 734. "You're looking like you slept in the freezer." "Thorn," Jerry commented, rubbing his gloved hands together. "Didn't sleep much. The filtration unit cycled hard last night." "Needed to check the pressure gauges," Marcus replied, his voice a low rumble. He wasn't lying. The unit, his constant financial burden, demanded constant vigilance, a mechanical extension of Clara's own fragile lungs. Jerry sighed, the vapor turning instantly white in the hub's cold air. "Look, November is when the city starts getting brutal. The routes get slower, the commercial dumps get waterlogged, and Christmas rush means twice the cardboard. You burn yourself out now. You risk a suspension when the real weather hits." Marcus straightened, adjusting the cuff of his glove. "The risk is necessary, Vance. We are entering the highest risk period for illness. Every shift is guaranteed income. I miss one, and the interest on the amortization schedule eats faster than I can replace it." The $7,500 debt wasn't a static figure. It was a living, breathing entity demanding daily sacrifice. Marcus had managed to reduce the principal by a few $100s, an act requiring immense overtime, but the interest payments alone felt like pouring money into an endless pit. The medical invoice stack loomed larger in his mind, each page a testament to an insurmountable cost that he was stubbornly refusing to yield to. His job in the Willow Creek District became a psychological trial. The streets, already cluttered with the debris of forgotten dreams, now sat under a layer of slick, crystalline ice. The manual labor of hauling bins up icy driveways and stabilizing the large dumpsters on unstable ground demanded a new level of physical precision. He couldn't afford to fall. An injury meant not just pain, but the catastrophic failure of the stability he had engineered. He continued his practice of silent observation. He saw the physical debris as an analog for systemic failure. On one corner, he collected boxes filled with high-end unused children's toys, clearly a failed attempt at a Christmas sales venture. On another, he found the shattered remnants of a guitar and a meticulously organized school binder, suggesting a talent or education abruptly aborted by circumstance. This landscape of grime and decay offered Marcus a strange comfort. It was a tangible reality. He could lift the trash, crush it, and remove it. The complex, invisible enemy of the bureaucracy and the debt, however, defied such simple physical solutions. Yet by conquering the physical reality every day, he felt he was gathering the strength to withstand the invisible enemy. The emotional anchor was Clara. He made sure to spend focused, quality time with her between his shifts and his administrative work. He noticed how her early quietness had matured into a profound, almost adult observation of his commitment. One Saturday afternoon, confined to their apartment due to the cold which intensified the risk of ambient pathogens, Clara was sitting near the filtration unit, drawing. The unit, humming softly, was her sentinel. "Papa," she called, her voice thin but clear. "Is the mountain still there?" Marcus was reading the fine print on a pharmaceutical rebate form, trying to claw back $14 for a specialized saline solution. He placed the form down. "The mountain is still there, sweet pea. But look." He brought over her drawing from weeks ago, the jagged mountain representing the debt. He had taped it to the refrigerator. Using a red marker, he drew a small downward arrow on the summit. "We took a step down this week. A small step, but a step." Clara traced the arrow with her finger. "It doesn't look smaller. The mountain of debt is so big you can't see the difference immediately," Marcus explained, crouching down so they were eye level. "But every day we put the work in. Every piece of trash I lift, every form I fill out is a new handhold. We don't stop because we don't see the top. We stop when we reach the bottom of the other side. Resilience, Clara, that's the engine." She smiled, a slight hopeful upturn of her pale lips. "I like the orange vest engine. It's a good engine," he agreed, touching the worn fabric hanging on the coat rack. It was critical that she'd not just see him working, but understand the why. That stability was a deliberate daily act of will. The stability he had maintained since the $785 incident was precarious, however. The city's failed bid event earlier that year, the cutting of non-essential health benefits, meant every financial decision was now a critical calculation. He had to assume the system was actively working against his success. The ultimate test of his dedication, the one that threatened to break the sacred promise of stability, arrived in the second week of November. The tension had been building for weeks, culminating in an atmospheric pressure system that trapped frigid air over the city, threatening widespread service disruption. Marcus felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. Contamination fines were often levied against the operator in charge of the route if the failure was deemed preventable. A fine now would negate weeks of overtime. Jerry, looking genuinely afraid, pushed his cap back. "Hayes, my truck, Unit 811, is shaking." I felt the steering linkage get stiff on the way in. "You run a light residential backup until we can look at it," Hayes commanded, assigning Jerry to peripheral streets outside the main trouble zone. "Thorne, you're in 734. You hit the core loop. Priority is the market, then the municipal laundry. Do not deviate. Be precise. Be fast." Marcus nodded, his focus narrowing to an intense, pinpoint clarity. Precision and speed were his only allies. He checked 734 again, tapping the hydraulic lines, listening intently to the low idle of the diesel engine. The truck was running, but sluggishly. The ice was a thief of power. He drove out into the pre-dawn darkness. The Willow Creek district had transformed. The streets shimmered under the sodium lamps. Every sound, the crunch of the tires, the hiss of the air brakes, was amplified and distorted by the extreme cold. The first 3 commercial stops went smoothly, though slowly. Marcus dismounted the truck for every lift, manually securing the large metal bins before engaging the hydraulic arms. The process required immense physical effort, hauling the bins across slick surfaces, but he executed it flawlessly. Then came the municipal laundry facility. It was situated at the bottom of a steep, untreated grade. The facility used industrial-sized 6-yard dumpsters, always overflowing with thick, heavy, wet linen. Marcus pulled up, the tires spinning slightly even at slow speed. He set the parking brake and dismounted, his boots finding purchase only on the untreated sidewalk strip. The dumpsters were packed solid, easily weighing 1,500 pounds each. He worked on the first one. He struggled to align the lift bar, the sheer weight compounded by the ice, making the movement almost impossible to control. He grunted, using his entire body weight to muscle the bar into position, his breath steaming violently. Clang, hiss, the lift engaged. The dumpster groaned, slowly rising. Halfway up, the hydraulic fluid, thickened by the extreme cold despite his pre-shift warming protocol, stuttered. The heavy container momentarily stalled, throwing the delicate balance of the truck off-kilter on the ice. The heavy, pressurized oil was resisting the work. Marcus swore under his breath, a rare expression of panic. He manually modulated the lift speed, coaxing the metal behemoth upwards, the strain visible in the tremor running through his arms. He managed to invert it, the sodden linens cascading into the crushing bay. The 1,500-pound dumpster slammed back down onto the pavement, narrowly missing the curb. It didn't damage the truck, but the force jolted the entire hydraulic system. Marcus felt the sharp, immediate fear that transcended physical exhaustion. He was locked into a critical failure state. He checked the truck's pressure gauge. The sudden shock had triggered a pressure relief valve, slowing the system dramatically. He would need 20 minutes, perhaps 30, just to stabilize the hydraulics enough to lift the remaining 3 dumpsters. He looked at the 3 uncollected bins, overflowing with refuse. This was the moment of the Miss Street pickup, the failure he had feared most, the rupture of his perfect stability record. He climbed back into Unit 734, his hands slick with sweat and cold. He radioed Hayes, reporting the mechanical issue with controlled neutrality. Hayes' voice crackled through the static, laced with urgency. "Thorne, you know the policy. If those laundry containers are essential, if you miss them, the overflow is your liability." Marcus drove away, the weight of the 3 missed bins pressing down on the truck. He felt the cold sting of professional failure. He had been so fanatical about maintaining stability that the simple, brutal reality of the environment had defeated him. The sacred promise of professional perfection, designed to reflect unwavering paternal resilience, was broken. He spent the next 2 hours attacking the market collection with a ferocity born of self-reproach. The market, busy even in the cold, generated huge amounts of specialized refuse-produced crates. Butcher paper, massive water-filled cardboard boxes. He worked with inhuman speed, manually wrestling the bins and running the hydraulics at their absolute limit, gambling that the system wouldn't fail again. But the laundry bins remained. He drove Unit 734 back toward the sanitation hub, his mind racing. He had to clear the bins. He knew the residual pressure would not be sufficient for the heavy lift again, and risking further mechanical failure was irresponsible. Marcus didn't punch out. He marched over to the non-hydraulic operations bay, the smaller, rear-loading trucks he had used during his light-duty period. He found a small single-axle pickup with an open bed and a standard hand truck. Jerry saw him pulling on a second pair of gloves. "Thorne, what are you doing?" "Hayes cleared you for the day. Go home." "The laundry bins, Vance," Marcus said simply. "I am responsible for them. You can't manually haul 5 tons of wet linen and steal out of a ditch by yourself. It's suicide," Jerry exclaimed. "It's not suicide, Jerry. It's accountability," Marcus corrected him. "I promised stability. I failed the collection. I will redeem the failure." Marcus drove the small, anonymous backup truck back out into the Willow Creek district. He found the laundry facility. The 3 bins sat exactly where he had left them, massive islands of refuse and failure. He spent the next 2 hours engaged in the most grueling, intimate labor of his career. He did not use the hand truck, realizing it would slip on the ice. He opened the dumpsters, climbed inside, and began manually bagging the wet, heavy linen. He then hoisted the industrial-strength plastic bags over the rim, carried them one by one to the small pickup, and stacked them in the bed. The wet cloth was impossibly heavy, slick with frozen soap residue and chemical cleaners. His back, which had only just begun its reluctant mend, screamed in protest. Every lift was a fresh contract with physical pain. As the sun rose higher, casting a pale, weak light over the ice, Marcus was covered in sweat despite the freezing temperature. The orange utility vest was soaked and stained. He moved with the slow, relentless rhythm of a man powered by pure, non-negotiable will. He wasn't thinking of the money, the fine, or the debt. He was only thinking of Clara. He realized that this unseen, off-the-clock act of manual redemption was the truest form of the lesson he was trying to teach her. That you define yourself not by avoiding failure, but by how quickly and fiercely you return to the mission after failure strikes. This was the dawn realization, not viewed from the cab of Unit 734, but experienced in the cold, wet trenches of physical collapse. When the final bag was loaded, Marcus stood back, looking at the now empty concrete pad. The commercial dumpsters, emptied of their massive loads, stood waiting for the next service. He had cleared the wreckage. He had refused to yield. Hayes was waiting for him. "I heard you had a little excursion, Thorne," Hayes said, his voice deceptively calm. Marcus simply presented the keys to the backup truck. Laundry collection complete, sir. No contamination fines issued. Hayes leaned against the wall, observing Marcus's absolute exhaustion. The grime on Marcus's hands, the sheen of dried sweat on his forehead spoke volumes. You know, Thorne, you're not supposed to run manual cleanups off the clock. That's a liability violation, Hayes stated, though there was no real disciplinary threat in his tone. I was addressing an essential service failure, sir. The failure was logged, Marcus replied. Hayes shook his head slowly. Most men would have blamed the cold, left the bins, and taken the official reprimand. You almost broke your back for 3 dumpsters. I do the job, sir, Marcus reiterated, his eyes fixed firmly on Hayes. Emergency hazard compensation. It was a minor windfall, perhaps an extra $300 that could be immediately applied to the amortization schedule. Marcus felt a wave of relief so intense it nearly buckled his knees. He hadn't just redeemed the failure. He had extracted a marginal victory from the system, acknowledging the extraordinary nature of his commitment. Thank you, sir, Marcus managed, the exhaustion finally overriding his stoicism for a brief, honest moment. He punched out, the time card registering the end of his official duty but not the end of his daily burden. He drove home, the cab of 734 warm and smelling faintly of diesel and salt. The relief was immediate, but his mind quickly moved back to the administrative battleground. The $300 was a temporary fix. The mountain of the medical invoice stack was still there. That evening, the first thing he did was not rest, but clean. He stripped off the soiled vest and uniform and stood under a scalding shower, washing away the grit of the day. The physical act of cleansing felt like a renewal of his purpose. He found Clara at the kitchen table, waiting for him, the aroma of her specialized nutritional supplement wafting from the counter. She had his clean orange utility vest laid out on a chair. You were late, Papa, she observed quietly. There's a complication on the route, Sweet Pea. The ice was tricky, Marcus admitted. He never lied to her about the reality of the work, only managed the presentation of the risk. Did you fix it? Yes, I fixed it. Clara didn't need details. She only needed the confirmation of his persistence. She pointed to a new addition to her drawing on the refrigerator. She had added a stick figure in an orange vest, standing at the base of the jagged mountain, holding a small, determined shovel. The mountain still needs digging, she said, touching the drawing. Marcus sat down, pulled the clean vest toward him, and laid his calloused hands on the fabric. It does, Clara, and we will keep digging. The next few weeks passed in a relentless cycle of physical recovery and administrative maintenance. The hazard pay helped him pay down an extra portion of the high-interest loan, a small victory that reduced the monthly interest burden. He continued his meticulous tracking, defending his ground against the systemic encroachment. Marcus realized that the true hope he sought was never going to be a miraculous event, a winning lottery ticket, or a sudden cure. Those were fantasies offered by the world of discarded potential. His hope was concrete, defined by action, and measured by the unwavering nature of his dedication. He had faced the ultimate failures, the bureaucratic trap, the physical breakdown, and the professional lapse of the Miss Street pickup. And each time his response, persistence, diligence, and defiant effort had not just salvaged the situation, but reinforced the foundation of stability he had built. One cold morning, 3 weeks before Christmas, Marcus found himself back on the familiar Willow Creek streets. The sky was just beginning to lighten, painting the horizon a bruised violet. He completed the difficult laundry collection route flawlessly, having learned the limits of Unit 734 on the icy grade. He finished his last commercial stop and drove to a high point in the district, pulling over for a required 15-minute maintenance check. He climbed out of the cab, leaning against the cold, familiar metal of the truck. He looked down over the Willow Creek district. The streets were stirring, beginning their daily transformation from the silent decay of night to the noise and struggle of the day. He saw the refuse bins waiting, the evidence of human lives, dreams, and failures. The early sunlight struck the dull sheen of his orange utility vest. He felt the ache in his muscles, the residual strain from the cleanup. He felt the weight of the medical invoice stack, the looming debt, and the certainty of future struggles. But beneath the ache and the weight there was a profound stillness. He wasn't trapped by the orange vest. He was defined by it. The resilience he needed to teach Clara was not an abstract concept. It was the tangible reality of his presence, his commitment, his absolute refusal to stop showing up. He closed his eyes, inhaling the cold, crisp air of the dawn. The city was waking up, but he had already done the work. He had secured another day. He knew the debt wouldn't disappear overnight. The mountain would take years to conquer. but he had found the engine that made the journey possible. Marcus Thorne, the sanitation worker, understood completely. True strength was measured not by what you achieved, but by what you refused to give up. And he would never give up the fight, the persistence, or the love that fueled his engine. The hope was in the refusal itself. He climbed back into Unit 734, shifted the heavy transmission into drive, and headed back to the sanitation hub, ready for whatever the new day, the new invoice, or the new systemic burden might bring. The commitment was absolute. The mission continued. The garbage collector had found his hope, forging it daily in the crucible of labor and love. Hit the thumbs up and subscribe to join the crew.